Welcome back. We are Noble Fury Podcast. We're doing a podcast today on film, movies. What makes movies cool? Let's take a look at something to get us going, Jeff. You ready?
Yeah.
Spielberg went on to say, "The Godfather, for me, is the greatest American film ever made."
Wow. Okay. So the number one, the best American-made film is The Godfather, at least according to Mr. Spielberg. To me, the first thing that comes to mind is this podcast isn't long enough to talk movies. But the second thing is what's the criteria? What is he, obviously story is fantastic. I mean, there's the elements, The Godfather's, one of the better films of all time.
So I'm not sure that criteria is the best word to use because it's a little, sort of overly formalistic, I guess. What we're really looking for is an attribute or attributes. If you think about the various genres of films, what makes some films good and some films bad or some films mediocre, it's not some one or two or three things. It's not always those same things. So I think it's better to think about attributes of good films or attributes of great films. And one of those attributes is an incredibly compelling story. And the story is usually a story that where a character or characters are overcoming some adversity, some medical a problem, some intellectual problem, some social problem. They could be overcoming a lack of athleticism, or they could be overcoming perceptions about, what they're capable of. You think of these great movies like Hoosiers or Rudy. Those movies are so good because the story is set in this, rural towns, and they're about kids, and they're about kids coming together and becoming something that it's much greater than what they would be by themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what we're getting at.
So getting into some of our favorite films, I mean, especially if we're sort of driving a stake in the movie map of The Godfather, that era, right? We've got Bullet, you've got 3 Days of the Condor, one of my favorite films of all time.
Great movie.
Yeah, fantastic film with Robert Redford.
Sidney Pollack directed that, I believe.
Yeah, yep. And you've got Dr. Zhivago, we mentioned. You've got French Connection.
Gene Hackman was in French Connection.
Yeah, and of course Bullet with Steve McQueen. Great story. And
by the way, Gene Hackman was also in a really good movie called Conspiracy. I think it was just called Conspiracy, maybe.
Okay.
He reprised that role in the 1997, 1999 Will Smith movie, where he played a guy who had pulled out of the CIA, out of the clandestine services, and was helping Will Smith, who was a lawyer in his role, who was being pursued by the CIA because they thought he had some information about something in his law practice, which he didn't actually have. So he used the Gene Hackman character from Conspiracy. So these movies are sometimes tied together in strange ways.
Tying two demographics together, right? Two demos, right? Age demographics, pulling them in because Hackman had such a huge fan base. So the other films that, there's some of these masterpieces of the time, the Bogart films, Treasure Sierra Madre and African Queen, and you've got Papillon, with Dustin Hoffman and Steve McQueen. Fantastic film, underrated film. So many great movies of that time period. And by the way, for the sake of this conversation, Jeff, I think for our own sanity, we're sort of setting aside sort of blockbuster bombs. There's so many films in the last. And we could do a whole podcast.
And that's probably true, too. While I think that there are some entertaining, at least I find some of the current, not current, but some of the Marvel productions interesting and fun and good. I don't think any of them are great movies in the sense that they sort of changed because of the story. Some of the characters are very compelling. Thor, Chris Hemsworth, playing this Thor character, reprising it in several follow-ups. Tony Stark's character, Robert Downey Jr., fantastic. He did a great job with that. and the ensemble Avengers and the 3 or 4 that were in that followed the original Avengers. Very good. But these movies are really just sort of fun movies. I don't think they would be considered great movies.
Well, creatively, gosh, I may take some heat for saying this. Creatively, they feel a little bit almost lazy in a sense that you've got this legacy, right, character. You've got these, a 50, 75-year history from the comic books, right? So you've built this, there's a built-in sort of you're sort of cheating, right? You're not creating something from the ground up, a whole new concept,
Well,
right?
the original cartoons that gave rise to all of these, these Marvel shows, all the production themes, had been around for, I guess since the 50s, if I'm not mistaken on that.
Sure.
And DC Comics as well. I think that's where Batman and the Spider-Man may come from as well. Superman come from.
Yeah.
So that's been around for a long time. And Stan Lee, who was one of the original contributors to those Marvel comics, he had a little role in each of the cameo role in each of these movies. I think until he died,
which is great. That was marketing. That was the marketing guys. Stan Lee. I met Stan Lee several times and knew him a little bit. He was always at Comic-Con down in San Diego, and I sent him something after a panel because I was involved with the film company, and he was a guest on a panel, and he sent me a little note, and I still have it, and it's like a bookmark, and it's got a little picture of Spider-Man, and he said, "Thanks for all your help, Scott Stan Lee." It's very cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a neat little piece of
Belia.
Yeah, exactly. But he was very gracious. He was the kind of person that said yes to everybody, and then he backfilled trying to make commitment, honor all his commitments. Nice, very nice person, and for all the right reasons, right? Credited with creating Spider-Man, one of the most prolific, characters,
sure.
comic book, film, TV, cartoons, movies, merchandising. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than Spider-Man, and it all started with Stan Lee.
So with those limitations in place, what how do you want to pursue this sort of discussion about? Because there's so many dimensions to it. So what do you think is like a relevant sort of frame of reference that we should use, sort of to structure the narrative?
Well, there's a lot of parameters with which there's low budget. There's indie films. There's the genre films. There's genre production companies, Blumhouse, and I mean now A24 is I think one of the biggest production companies. They started really small. Jason Blum started Blumhouse he started with Paranormal Activity, a film he bought for I don't know $5,000 or something, and it made I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars. And Back to Blair Witch, which was another independent film, and Napoleon Dynamite.
Do you remember when Blair Witch first came out?
Sure.
So my current wife, my only wife, who we were just dating at the time when Blair Witch was around, that was a pretty scary film. I found that to be, once you've seen it, it's not scary anymore. But the idea of it was very authentic. It felt very real, almost like it was documentary style. You were being followed by the camera in the woods and people running, and it was very attractive. In a thrilling sense, it was it was kind of an attractive film,
and it capitalizing on the sentiments that you're now explaining was what Jason Blum did with Paranormal Activity, the baby monitors and the kids scaling up the wall, and it was really really scary and creepy, and he's turned that into a multi-billion-dollar. He's got a production company now. Obviously, now he had a production company pretty quickly. He's got a distribution arm and a whole army of people making a lot of films. He did the films with Ethan Hawke. I'm trying to remember anyway the franchise of survivalist films where there was an Armageddon in essence. And
I must have missed that period.
Yeah, well, Jason Blum did some really smart things. He makes his films very inexpensively by comparison to the studios, and then backloads them when he gets a few names. And, really intelligent. He was at the American Film Archive. I saw him a few times, and kind of quiet and just very unassuming, but now a behemoth in the industry. Like Tyler Perry, by the way, has got a whole studio in Georgia and created a whole cottage industry for his films. The Medea films, which make billions of dollars. I mean, Tyler Perry's films and TV shows are as successful as any franchise in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And all started small, indie, kind of gritty. And so to answer your question, what are we judging these
Well,
by?
so I would say that one of the things that I'm sort of fascinated with right now in film is the contrast between how films were made, say 40 or 50 or 60, 70 years ago versus today. So there's a new franchise. It's science fiction. I happen to be a science fiction kind of buff, but the quality of some of the new science fiction stuff is so good. So what I'm referring to particularly is Dune and Dune Part Two, and those were COVID. So I guess 2020, 2021 was the first one, and then last year Dune 2 came out, and this is a very, I mean, an unusually good version. So Dune has been attempted to be made. This is Frank Herbert's book from the '60s. And well, he wrote a ton of books, like 6 or 7 or 8 of them, following up on it, but they get a little weird. The first one is the one that was turned into a movie in the '80s, and then again, I think in the early 2000s, late '90s, several times. And I think there's a made-for-TV version of Dune. But the Canadian Denis Villeneuve, he really knocked it out of the park. His version of Dune is not just, I mean, it's cinematically sweeping. It's beautiful.
Are you talking about the screenplay, or did he direct it?
He's the director, and
Okay.
I think he did do some of the writing as well. But the look is David Lean, except modern, and the storytelling is very good, very compelling storytelling, and that is a dimension that I think is missing from a lot of movies today, is the good storytelling.
Yeah, I think 2 things come out of what you just mentioned to me. One is the story. It always starts, I teach film, and I would try to tell my students, it really starts with story. Good story, possibly a good movie. Bad story, no chance.
Yeah.
Done. Second thing about the Dune franchises, and this is me speaking a little bit bitterly about budgets. I make films, and my films there's no money to make any movies. A couple $100,000, you make a film. Good luck with it. Dune is a 250, 300 million.
No. I
It must be.
think no, I don't think the budgets were that big.
200? They weren't even 200 million?
I don't think so. I think and I don't know. So I'm just going to throw numbers out here. I think I read the first one was made for like 80 million, maybe.
Oh, wow.
And the second one maybe 120. So there,
And look at the box office success in those, making billions of dollars worldwide. Yeah, so what a great return on investment for the studios, right? They just need more of those, And so that I think that's an interesting thing, is that dynamic about how do you define an indie film? Quickly, Fox Searchlight is Fox's independent film division. Their indie films are $10 million. That's an indie film to them, or 20 million or 50 million. That's not an indie film.
So the problem that we have, with modern film, is there's a lot of technology underlying the filmmaking process, and so you just lack sometimes the simple images, the simple gradations of shadow in a room. Everything is washed out white almost. One, because of CGI, and two, because of the use of digital cameras. Digital cameras, high resolution. It's not really digital cameras. That's not really the issue. It's the high frame resolution cameras. So when you're working with 6K or 8K, you end up having to throw a lot of light onto a subject to get the rich detail, and so you end up getting this sort of overly lighted environment. And I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about or not.
Sure.
So you look back in movies, even going back to the '90s, and they could be digital, right? The early 2000s, but in the '90s, you have a digital, camera, and it looks pretty good, and that's still because they're using warmer light, and they're not using as much light. So the total number of BTUs, sort of coming down, lumens coming down into a scene is different.
Yeah, I think stepping back from that just a little bit, there's also a sense of trying to create sort of a look on camera of a grittiness. And of course, you can get into a LUT, adding a filter, a lookup table, a LUT to your film. But a lot of some of the problems too are, Jeff, when you have a huge budget, you have a lot of gaffers, you have a lot of camera assistants and a lot of DPs and a lot of knowledgeable people. And sometimes people light stuff and not over light, too much light, just over, they spend too much time and have unlimited amounts of time and unlimited amounts of budget. When you have a low budget, gritty film, you got a small 2-ton box truck with your whole light equipment is on the truck, and whatever you have. I mean, we had in Creep Band, we had times where we had the DP said, "Give me every light off the truck. I'm trying to light something up the side of a building." It's like we plugged in everything we had,
Right.
and the truck was empty.
Yeah.
And so that's how it looks kind of cool with shadows, and because we didn't have the ability, right?
But then you have the opposite issue where you have Stanley Kubrick, who it made 2001, the Shining. You may know him from a number of films.
2 great movies.
Those are 2 great movies. But in particular, he did one called Barry Lyndon, which is a sort of a period piece. And I think it was early 70s, very early 70s. Ryan O'Neal was the lead actor in it. Well, he shot the entire movie with natural light.
Right.
Night scenes indoors, candle lit. Rest of it was natural light. And he chose most of the times to shoot around dusk to get the really attractive sun setting light.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
super warm, super like...
No, I mean, watch this movie. So if you haven't seen this movie, go out and find it somewhere and watch this movie. It's unbelievable to see what that looks like. And so he had built custom for that shot. So with cameras, when an aperture is very wide, it can bring in lots of light. And when so if you're in an outdoor setting and it's bright light, you want a very narrow, just like your pupil in your eye. When you're in indoor and it's dark, the dilation is wide open on the pupil, and then it closes up tightly when you go outside. Well, the same thing is true with a camera lens with a mechanical type of shutter, and so aperture, and so he had made some apertures that were enormous with the film, because they use prime lenses, just big fixed glass, no zoom on it. And they would open up really wide so that the candle light would be sufficient to light that scene. That would probably cost, I'm just going to throw out a number of maybe a couple $100,000 to have somebody build all the custom lenses for him for that movie. So to your point, that's expensive to do. The output is magnificent, though. It's a beautiful movie.
Right.
Highly recommend. I mean, whether you like Ryan O'Neal or not, it's a really compelling movie. All of Stanley Kubrick's movies were. In fact, we were just talking about earlier today Stanley Kubrick's early short called Paths of Glory, and it had Kirk Douglas in it. And this was a kind of a World War I movie setting, and I think it was an anti-war kind of motif. But you could tell that Stanley Kubrick was very young. Stanley Kubrick was a different style director. It is a look that doesn't happen yet. He kind of invents a look that he ends up developing.
And this is where I think he forges his friendship with Douglas, because they went and made Spartacus.
That's right. After that,
yeah, which is
was a high budget studio movie.
Sure. Yeah.
At the time.
Really, some of the films. It's funny you mentioned Tatum O'Neal.
Ryan O'Neal. Yeah.
Ryan O'Neal. Tatum O'Neal is in one of my favorite movies, Paper Moon, which is a sort of an under-recognized. I think she won an Academy Award at 12 or 13 for that performance.
Now, interestingly, her brother, right, which is Ryan O'Neal's son, was decapitated in a boating accident while he was on board of some boat with Francis Ford Coppola's son. They were off, kind of drinking, having a fun time on boats, and somehow they got near a wire, and boop, he was decapitated.
Yikes. Yeah, lots of tragedy in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Both behind the camera and in front of the camera, right?
So my point, though, of talking about some of these films, we talked about Otto Preminger did a film called, I think it was 58 or 59, called Anatomy of a Murder. And this is a Jimmy Stewart movie where he plays a lawyer, kind of a lawyer who's just sort of a run-of-the-mill lawyer looking really to kind of retire or to stop practicing law. And he gets this case that's so intriguing, and he puts everything into it, and it's a fantastic movie. But
Great performance by Stewart,
it's
of course.
a great performance by Stewart.
Still gets accolades today. I mean, people.
I would recommend watching it to this day. It's a great movie.
It's a movie that's studied a lot.
But it's got story. It's full of story, and so modern films do not have as much story. They're more driven by technology. They're more driven by explosions. Now, look, I love an Arnold Schwarzenegger blow up.
Mission Impossible with
I
Cruise.
like Mission Impossible movies. They're very good, Tom Cruise. But these are not like stories that are developed in the way that the great films develop a story. The story that sticks around. Many Mission Impossible stories, they run into each other. You forget it. These other stories that we're talking about from films, they are very memorable. I wasn't even around in the early 60s. I don't know what happened, but I've watched movies from the early 60s or late 50s, and I think about them from time to time, and I can recall a lot of information from them because they were so compelling of a movie, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, well, it is back to, stepping back to the state of indie film. Starting off, Wes Anderson did his first low budget indie film called Bottle Rocket, which introduced the world to Owen Wilson, I think, the Wilson brothers.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of as Wes Anderson, right? I think did that. There's a bunch of the early films. The sort of darling now is obviously the guy that directed Tenet. I'm drawing a blank on his name. Writes and directs and makes these huge blockbuster, out of control, crazy films. And we're going to probably get some feedback on this. I didn't think Tenet was anything I thought the opening scene was really cool. But it was all talky, and it wasn't my kind of film. And I tried to watch it, and everybody was raving about it. And so there's a lot of that going on where the critical acclaim sometimes doesn't match your expectations.
So the problem with with even talking about film,
Christopher Nolan is
Christopher Nolan. When you talk about film, like what's better, one film better than another, it's very difficult because this is very subjective. This is like saying what color is better. Well,
wallpaper.
You can't really say that, right? So things generally that are preferences are not subject to truth statements. They're not truth falsification. You can't say that this is correct or not correct, that your favorite color is blue, or that you prefer the taste of limes to lemons. That's just you, right?
This is sort of the Taylor Swift Beatles argument, right? Like it was album sales and who's better. And it's like it's people's taste.
You could, if you were to look at it in terms of album sales, revenues generated, you could do box office. You could do it that way. If you're looking at it in terms of quality, aesthetic, art form, you could look at it another way, right? I find, as I said a moment ago, I find the Avengers franchise, the earlier stuff, not the most recent stuff, very compelling. I think it's a lot of fun. I could watch it with my kids, and it's interesting, and we all enjoy it. But watching,
but always thin on story and big on special effects, like you said a minute ago.
It's all about the blow-ups and explosions, and I like blow-up and explosions. I mean, you could go back and watch Arnold Schwarzenegger, Predator, his early evolution. Didn't he do a movie where he was also a spy and his wife was working as a spy? We recently saw that with my kids, and
another movie you're talking about.
You know what? It was fun. It was interesting. He also did Predator, which was this is a fun movie. This is an interesting, different kind of movie. So you can enjoy movies, but you know that it's not a great movie, right? It's sort of like enjoying a hamburger and fries, and it's not a good food, but you really enjoyed it, or a taco plate or something. It was okay, and you enjoyed it, but it wasn't great food, right?
Well, there's some truth to that. This is part of why these throwback movies. We mentioned Napoleon Dynamite, which was made for $400,000 and made I don't know how many hundreds of millions for Sony. And all the merchandising and all that. So there are those anomalies where you can make a film for no money and make a ton of money. But I think a lot of, particularly in the horror genre, there's a whole thing about CGI, and of course CGI is obviously accelerated, and it's a lot better than even just a few years ago. But there's the thing between CGI and practical effects. And when you watch a low budget horror film and there's practical effects, people notice that it's not one-dimensional blood dripping down something. Yeah. It's not added by,
CGI has gotten so good now. It is really difficult sometimes to distinguish reality from
almost too good in some
non-reality.
respects.
Well,
Because-
earlier on, filmmakers, studios discovered that when they did their testing on audiences, that the stuff was kind of creepy. It was good, but not good enough yet, but close. So it actually creeped out viewers, and so these focus groups.
The Hulk comes to mind. Remember the Hulk?
So these focus groups
Yeah.
ended up sort of sending a signal that, hey, we shouldn't do this, and they waited for years. So the CGI has improved so much that you can get away with actually using pure CGI to do some things that you couldn't do in the past. So, bringing this back to our opening segment, about Francis Ford Coppola and Godfather, the one of the reasons why that would be in, say, my top 3 films, I agree with Spielberg on that point. It's got an immense story. It's fantastic. You see Abe Vigoda talking about when one of the characters, this sort of brutish guy, was killed, and they got a package with armored vest with a fish in it, and it's a Sicilian sign.
Mm-hmm. Didn't the book win a Pulitzer Prize?
Yes, the book. Mario Puzo wrote this, so the idea is that the story is filled with all these little anecdotes and all this information that's detailed and real. You had amazing performances.
Well, Coppola even talked about how he wrote a scene in the film about the one of the moms was cooking the Italian dinner, and he said it was reminiscent of his mother cooking, and she's clanking the pots and pans.
Hey, Mikey!
And she's running the water and clinking the pans and busy cooking and like hustling around the kitchen, and they're all sitting around the kitchen table talking. And he said basically he fashioned that scene after his own kitchen. Which is that whole camaraderie, the Italians, all the passion.
There's a scene where Michael Corleone is. This is after they've gone to the mattresses, right? So they're all holed up in the house now, and Sonny was killed at the toll booth. We're all killed at the toll booth, and now we don't have to worry about that because we have drive-through easy passes. So I can't think of the name of the actor. He's this big plump guy, dark head of hair, and he's making this pot of marinara sauce for everyone for their pasta. And he tells Mike, "Hey, you still seeing that girl?" And Mikey, Corleone says something, and he says, "Hey, you tell that girl you love her." And then, it sets into this. It was so diffusing. These men that are gunning people outside the house, trying to attack them. And
the soft moment
there's a soft moment of this younger guy saying, "Hey, tell that girl you love her," right? Wow. I mean, think about the contrast of it. And the whole movie is shot through with that.
Really entertaining stuff.
So I mean, the performances are amazing. The look is great. That's that darks. Lights, contrast, the soft muted colors, no CGI anywhere, and a crazy good story.
Yeah, listen, we missed so much. We didn't talk about Tarantino stuff. We didn't talk about Woody Allen. We didn't talk about Hitchcock.
You know what? We could do a podcast on each, and maybe we will.
We didn't talk about Scarborough Studios. They're young and upcoming. We didn't talk about Creep Fan 2 that you're working with me on. We didn't talk about any of this stuff. We've missed a lot of juicy movie stuff.
Thanks for sticking around. I hope you appreciate the content. And if you do, like and subscribe.
See you next time, Jeff. Thanks, buddy.
Bye-bye.